Welcome to CurveBall DFI-ed, currently not sponsored by anyone. I'm your host, David Ayofi, and on our fourth podcast, we have the pleasure of having Jason Gessner. He's a successful investment analyst who is working for Treeline Companies. Jason has an amazing journey starting off working in the accounting industry and switching over to the real estate world. In today's podcast, we'll learn how he successfully made the transition and what motivated him to keep going. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you. Thank you for that intro.
Yeah, pretty good. We like to really research our podcast guests, and I want to give a huge shout out to Rabbi Mendy for putting me in contact with you. You know, Olami really has been helping me significantly, and Rabbi Mendy specifically in helping me land my first couple of guests on the podcast. So I want to kind of like off the bat, I want to go kind of into this thing. Obviously, the way we got connected was through Rabbi Mendy. I want to get into kind of like how has being in like the young Jewish development, how has being part of the young Jewish development network that is like Olami and being part of Rabbi Mendy, how has that helped you like continue your professional development?
Sure. So great question. I've been, just as a backstory, involved in sort of the whole young professional Jewish learning and stuff since college. It got me really into it and sort of stayed continuously. I guess one of the big things, at least the Jewish learning has done for me, is it kept me learning a different perspective, like how when you learn Talmud and all these other type of Torah learnings, you're constantly challenging and questioning all the previously taught examples and thoughts and sort of never taking anything for granted. And just using that mentality has definitely helped in not just following sort of that beaten path that we're all told, hey, you go to college, you do this job for X number of years, then you do this. So it really, I want to say, give me the confidence to be able to ask questions. And then obviously it doesn't go without saying that you meet some of the most amazing people at like Rabbi Mendy I would have met without having experiences like that.
Yeah, I think that's like one thing that is true. I remember Rabbi Mendy told me one time, he's like, if you meet the right amount of Jews, you basically could be connected to any single person in New York City. And I think that's so factual because like any single person you could possibly want, like a rabbi knows, like they always have like their whole investment meetings. Like you wouldn't think about rabbis doing that, but I think it's very cool. Kind of like staying on the part about how you said you started Olami, going to like Jewish events when you were in college. I want to know a little bit more about like your your college trajectory, because obviously you went initially into the accounting and then you realized that you want to go more into the real estate. So then you switched for that, as I understand, for your master's.
Yeah, that's correct.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between the like going into accounting versus real estate and the level of difficulties?
Sure. So first, to state the obvious, is I did undergrad at Rutgers with accounting and my master's at real estate at NYU. So it was a very different type of experience. Rutgers was more party, go out, socialize, sort of have that undergrad experience. While my master's was more of like, hey, I'm not going in the direction of my life that I want. How do I adjust this? This is a means to an end. It was so NYU was more used to help me take a step, while Rutgers was more of just figuring out how to start to become an adult and enjoy life. And then the big difference I would say, I guess, because maybe you're trying to get to allude as how it affected my career. And one of the big differences, if we're going to say it as honest as we can, is Rutgers is a very B school, NYU is an A school. So when I'm applying to jobs, the truth is I never thought, at least growing up, pedigree really mattered. And then you start getting some. I mean, NYU is still not the Harvards of the world, but when you're still applying to certain jobs, even my current one, the NYU made me stand out a lot more. So it was essentially, honestly, a way to buy a ticket to put my resume ahead of other resumes.
Yeah, I strongly agree with that. Like Stevens is known for engineering. Right now, I'm kind of shifting towards the VC side of things. So I'm starting to see how like, I probably should have went to or tried to transfer into like Stanford and Ivy. But like for engineering, Stevens is relatively the same type of caliber. So it didn't necessarily matter. That's why I ultimately started Do First Innovation to kind of give myself like that whole leg up. And also NYU is pretty good. Like Stern is like pretty up there, but it obviously matters what school and especially what type of degree that you are getting there. So I definitely understand what you were talking about. I wanted to know a little bit about why you decided to go to college to like pursue this whole real estate thing? Because nowadays a lot of people, they just get their real estate license, they're 18, 20 years old, and they just go straight into like selling houses. What made you want to go into college and kind of pursue it from a completely different angle?
Sure. So it depends what you want to do in real estate. And the broker route is a great way to get your hands dirty, get on the ground and adapt and sort of see how it all works. For me personally, though, I want to get into the investment side on a higher scale and literally moving larger chunks of cash and buying apartment buildings and such. And that's a much tougher area to break into. So I figured the way I could do it was leverage my accounting knowledge of being able to, build out these financial statements and be able to create pro formas and then back into the real estate end from the number side. And so I basically just took the skills I was given, leveraged them to break into what I wanted.
You spoke a lot about how like leveraging is super important, because if you know what you're good at, then you're able to, when you're applying for a job, be like, hey, like I may not be the best at this, and my background is like, for example, for myself, like when I'm applying right now for VC roles, I'm telling them like I'm definitely not the best at reading this financial data, but I'm definitely better than most people if you're trying to invest in engineering companies. Because I was on the site, I know exactly what you guys are looking for, and finance is something that you could teach, but that whole construction experience, you got to live on the site to understand that. So it's like
Nothing compares to that experience that you had with that. Like it's
exactly. So that's like the whole thing where it's like you need to understand how to leverage your position. And also like another thing that I think is super important to leverage and that we talk about a lot on CurveBall DFI-ed is how important it is to network and reach out to the first couple of people that to get you that door open, especially in venture capital where the door is not really opening that much for you. You got to find every single person that's willing to open the door. So can you talk a little bit about how networking has like affected?
sure. So my last two jobs were all networking. My last one I was at the startup. Basically, my old roommate is very into the VC space, and he works actually at Notion. He's the head of community there. And long story short, I was actually backpacking Vietnam on a scooter, and he reached out to me and said, "Hey, my buddy in Israel, he's starting a real estate company. He wants to pick people's brains." I was working in an investment bank at the time, in the middle of the transition, and we introduced, and I started talking to this guy. And it turned out we clicked right away. And I loved the concept of his startup. So I said, you know what? I want a follow-up call. Maybe we could work for you. We had a follow-up call and we just clicked again. And he decided on my way back from Vietnam to fly me to Israel where he was staying to interview me and then fly me home. And like, that was and I stayed for a few days and we like basically took the problems he was working on and just worked through them together to see how we would work together. And it was an instant click. So I went back, left my job, started with him and did that for about 2 years. And that was how networking helped there. And then my current job, actually, how I go back to the whole Jewish networking. I'm in an NYU WhatsApp Jewish group chat. And so the cousin of my boss posted in it, they were looking for an analyst. And so I literally reached out to his cousin and he introduced me. And now I've been there for about a year.
Amazing. The power of networking.
It's everything. Like the stuff you're doing like this is incredible. You will meet the most amazing people just doing this all the time.
And I think that another really good thing about networking, like I know a lot of people wouldn't believe this. Levy, the producer of the show, he's known me since middle school. I was definitely a lot more shy. I think I was always felt that I was comfortable in certain situations, but I was like definitely more quiet and scared to like come out.
I don't believe you were shy.
I wasn't always the tallest person in the room, and I was definitely tall, but not I didn't always have like this whole like this presence about me. So I definitely understand what you're talking about, and definitely this whole networking thing, it brings out the whole like confidence in you, because the minutes that people are starting to be interested in you, you're like, oh wow, I really am like this whole thing, and then you start like going to more meetings and you learn certain things, and it just the ball keeps on rolling and your confidence builds and you're able to keep and getting better, which I think is super cool. But you were talking a lot about how like you're like client facing roles, because you do go out there, you try to invest money. Can you talk a little bit about the qualities that you think you have that make you good?
Sure. This is said way too much these days, but I'm gonna bring it up. I'm just not afraid to fail. I mean, 80% of my job is talking to brokers, getting fed some beautiful story about a deal, and then finding out it's actually terrible. And they painted a pretty picture, painted a pig type of situation. So I guess I'm not. You gotta not be ready to fail. Even when I was switching roles, I was applying to probably 200 places at least. And I mean, not including the LinkedIn little, quick apply. I'm talking find them online, ping them, then apply, and the whole 9 yards. So I mean, just not being afraid to fail, because then when you succeed, it just feels that much better and you know what it's like. And then just being client facing also, it's to be able to see someone else's perspective. So, like, if I go to an investor and I raise money, or, I'm talking to a broker knowing, hey, they want to get their fee versus the investor wants to get their return. So, it's sort of being able to understand what the other person's going to gain out of the situation and making sure to be in their interest, to make sure he'll get his fee regardless, and your investor gets their return, and the bank gets to place their loan, but in the right risk level, and sort of just playing all the hats and making sure everyone's looked after. It's like going to a party and making sure everyone has a drink in their hand. You don't want to have that one person who's sitting there in the corner, not able to talk to anyone, bored.
Unless he's driving, because we don't support. He better be driving then. No, but I definitely agree with what you're talking about. How you have to bring value. And right now, as I'm going out and talking to startups every single day, I have to think, what value could I bring? And I realize that I'm in America. A lot of the startups that I reach out to are international. I'm able to talk to some of the startups that we have here in New York City, or some of the other ones in New York City. And a lot about what you just said about being okay with rejection. So I applied for a job in every single bank in New York City. I got rejected from every single one, but I still applied. I sat there for like 15 hours. I applied to every single one. Like, when I tell you every single one, every single position, I maxed it out. Got rejected.
It's a full-time job just applying.
Yeah, literally. And I got rejected from every single one. And I was like, you know what? I'm not upset. I went straight to the VC. Shout out to Joey Kim from Romulus. He gave me great advice. He's like, you're a student. Go out there. Go basically be an analyst. Like, nobody's stopping you. You're a student. Go learn. And actually, he gave me such great advice. And that's ultimately how this whole like DFI thing came together, because I'm having such a great time doing it. I was like, why don't I do it on a larger scale, try to help as many people as I could? And that's the thing that I realized that I could bring the value, is that I'm able to network to such an extent where I could kind of be like a matchmaker for these companies. And I think that's an amazing thing that you were talking about, how you're not scared to fail, because I think that every single person that has ever succeeded has failed at one point in their life.
And if it's only 1 point, they got pretty lucky.
Exactly. And also, being in New York City, it's like you have a lot more opportunities. So there's a lot more opportunities for you to fail.
Exactly. And then a lot more opportunities for you to rise then. So it goes every way.
Yeah. Also, like, in New York City, you have a lot of opportunities. Sometimes you have like imposter syndrome, where you're in a job and you're like, oh, wow, I'm really like, you're feeling like you don't belong in the room. I wanted to ask you, did you ever feel like that type of situation when you first got into a job, or when you were in a meeting with somebody and you're like, whoa, like, I don't belong here?
Trying to think. Honestly, if I did, it has to be years, because if you're in the room, even if you're not meant to be in the room, you'll learn from just being in the room. So if I'm in a room, and I mean, this is an extreme example, but like nowadays I'm in a room with a bunch of leasing brokers. I don't do leasing. So in your situation, sorry if I dance around the question, but I have no reason to be in that room other than to hear that my numbers are going to come true that I put in a pro forma. But the truth is, just by listening to them talk and go back and forth and understand, I'm hearing about the leasing velocity in the market and sort of understanding all the nooks and crannies that go into when I just type a number into a spreadsheet. And so if I felt out of place being in a room in a business in this job or my last jobs, I don't remember it.
I'm kind of just saying more of like, personally for myself, I'll be like talking to a startup in Ethiopia that's like trying to solve the hunger crisis there, and I'm like, wow, like, that's kind of crazy, because this company is literally trying to solve like this crazy issue, and they're taking the time out of their day to chat with me, and then I have like all this pressure on me where it's like, I need to try to help solve the solution, to come up with a solution for this problem. And I'm like, wow, that's actually like, it's a huge responsibility. So at times I do feel like I don't belong in the room, but then I realize that every single person that deals with the startup is going to have that same feeling because they're doing such a monumental thing. So it's honestly like a privilege that they're even talking to me. So that's kind of like what I was talking about, how it's like, even though you do feel like kind of an imposter, don't worry, so does everybody else. And you just got to power through and just keep going and kind of use it as an advantage, because it shows that you care, I feel like, when you're an imposter.
Right. Well, even if you bring something to the table, it doesn't have to be whatever their problem is, but it's something that's in your world, then they may not realize how we may not even realize how it connects back into it, because it's
Yeah.
all so. I don't know. I feel like if they're taking time to speak to you, there's usually a reason, whether they're
Yeah.
going to gain something out of you, and maybe you guys just don't know it yet.
That is very possible. You spoke a little bit about how when you're in the room with the brokers and you're trying to figure out if the numbers line. I wanted to know, how do you get clients to trust you with their money?
Got it. So I mean, the first big way to do it is put my own money into it. If I'm not investing in it, I can't expect an investor to invest in it. So that's like my number 1, 2, and 3 is I'll never take their money before mine. And then I also make it so the part of the deal where I'll make the most money is only once they've hit their hurdles. So in real estate, we have these splits where after a certain amount, we split the return. And so because of that, I don't really get a payday until not only do my promises come true, but they go above and beyond. So you kind of under promise, over deliver. And then because of the way you structure it, they get paid so they're happy. And then I get a much bigger payout because we succeeded. So I'm happy. So really, and then it also comes down to partnering with the right people. Like, to be honest, I'm 28. I have experience, but not enough to get some big players in. But because I partner with, for example, the current company I'm working at, where they let me work their, leverage their name. Thank you, Treeline, shout out. So because of that, a lot more prominent people will trust me with their funds, because they know not only am I in it and I'm running it and all my whole, how I'm going to be able to make my money and put food on my table comes from it, but I'm partnering with people who will make sure that it comes true. So it's sort of making yourself in that desperate situation where you only succeed if they do, and then putting all the pieces in line that you can do it and they believe you can do it. And then that's how I do it. So that's how my recommendation. So, and they see that. And then once you perform on one, they're going to come, everyone comes right back. If you perform on one, you'll perform on another, and then hopefully another and another, and everyone's even happier.
That's the best way to grow. And I think that those are the best companies that I love working with. If you are a company and every single person in the situation is winning, I think that's always great. I don't think that there should ever be a situation where one person is getting the better end of the deal, because at the end of the day, there's a right way to succeed and then there's a wrong way to succeed. If you're over like those jewelers that are charging these rappers like obscene amount of monies for like a chain, like those rappers, they're gonna get one chain from them and they may never return. Like, okay, they overpaid like $20,000 for this chain. They're not coming back. They're gonna find a jeweler that gives them way better prices, and they're gonna over time make way more business. So I really understand what you were talking about, and I think it's very cool how you put up your own money as well in the same business. But that kind of sounds like a risk. Obviously, you can't win every single time, and this is like, a real estate is one of those things where it's like it should go up every single time, but sometimes it's just you overpay for something. Can you talk a little bit about like the biggest risks that you had to take in your professional career?
Biggest risk. Well, I would say the biggest risk probably was leaving accounting, making that whole, having people work under me, had a great career, was making a good salary, and then decided to just take an entry-level real estate role that was making almost nothing. So I went from like being able to easily afford my rent and like go out with my buddies and like had a steady trajectory and a good path to, holy crap, like, can I afford I could afford like food that week, but it'd be like, I better figure something out in the next 6 months. Otherwise, like, what's going to go on here? I have to call my parents or like take out a loan or something. And essentially it worked. You just got desperate and I hustled because of it. It may work. So I guess the big risk was going from this certainty of accounting to diving into real estate, not knowing where it was going to take me, and just sort of half winging it, but educating myself while I winged it.
what made you want to wing it for your dream? Like, what was like that fire that's like, you
So
know
the
what?
truth is, when anyone ever wants to get into a new industry, like when I wanted to get into real estate, you think, oh, I know what I want. I want to do this. But the truth is, until you're in it, you don't really know anything. You just kind of know a dream that you see on paper, whether it's your friends, family, some Netflix movie. So I was kind of just like, I think this is what I want to do. I'm going to go for it. And then eventually I realized that I wanted to first do like investment banking to get as much experience, because I just knew they saw stuff all the time, new deals nonstop. And all I wanted was exposure. And then I would figure the next part out. So that's more what I was going for, but it was wait. And so I guess the main point of it is that even though I didn't know what I wanted, I knew where I wanted to be. And so I was willing to do what it took, even if whichever way I had to get into there, I went through, and to make sure there was no linear path. Because when you're that inexperienced, you don't know if there's a bottleneck that you're just unaware of. So because of that, I made sure there was more than one path to get there, even if some took longer or some took shorter. I hope that answers the question. I kind of went on a tangent.
No, it's fine. We love tangents here because each tangent, it has like, obviously if you bring in a little bit more, it's like extra credit.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that was really shocking that you said that right away. When you get into real estate, it's not like $1 million listings, just like how it is on the show. Like, you're not right away getting those like crazy listings.
No, I honestly started off buying small single family homes, like class B, class C. We're talking like $50,000 to $150,000 homes for the company I was working for before, and just managing them. And it was, even though it sounds sexy, oh, you're buying real estate and doing this, but like I was sometimes flying down to go collect rent and then meet a banker to negotiate finance terms. Like, this is not sexy stuff. Like, you're flying down, walking to the rooftop floor of a hotel building you're thinking of buying. This was like, no, I'm driving to like some good neighborhood, some bad, like check the homes out to see if we wanted to buy them, and then go stop at like a local bank to get, a handshake in.
I mean, that's like, everybody has to start somewhere. And I think that if you forget where you came from too fast, you may fail. And I think that that's like, I was listening to Anderson Cooper's, like, he was on a podcast that I really liked. And he said that right when he started becoming a journalist, he kind of made like a mistake, how he saw like a dead body and he touched it. Like, he was like, oh, wow, like, I wonder what that feels like. And somebody took a picture of him and he's like, oh, like, and somebody took a picture of him and now he has like that picture framed in his office to always remind himself that like, you should be like more aware of the situation that you're in, that it's not necessarily like, oh, like a museum. You have to like really value what it is. You're there to report a story and you got to take it seriously. So I think it's super important to remember how you start, because looking back, you're like, oh, wow, I really changed. Like, even looking back to when I first started college, I thought I wanted to work in the construction industry. And now I'm over here talking to startups that are trying to create innovations in the industry. Like, it's a completely different mindset, and you have to like figure out certain things. Can you talk a little bit more about what you think you look for when you're looking for partners to invest with you in projects?
When you say partners, are you talking about investors, or what specific?
Yeah, investors.
Sure. So I guess the most important things I'm looking for is someone that we can be mutually beneficial to each other. So let me give you an example. This isn't me specific, but the company I work for, one of the investors is the person who does the elevators, and another is a person who, has another big role in the company. And the reason is so, when the elevator goes out and they have to fix it, they are going to make sure it is fixed to perfection, because they have equity in that building also. So it's partnering with the right people that have the same interests as you lined up, because then you're all watching each other's back and helping each other. So I guess that's the first thing I look for, is people who are just in the ordinary course of business, but we just do different things, and this is my thing and that's their thing. So let's overlap it. And that's how you get closer and make much more investments together as well. And then I also look for investors who are, it's going to sound almost cliche, but educated enough to know how to invest, but not educated enough to know how to do what I do. So because of that, they're smart enough to understand what's going on and be able to invest with me, but they're not my competition. And so that's something I love looking for.
I think that there can't be, like, the minute it gets too many chefs in the kitchen, then it gets like too overwhelming to leave.
Oh, you can't do it then.
With the work. Yeah. It's just like, who's in charge really? And then it's like everybody's arguing with each other. And I think it's very important to have that balance.
Yeah.
Talking about balance, can you explain a little bit about like the investment industry? It's like you're working crazy hours. You're doing like, you don't have like a normal schedule. Can you talk a little bit about how you balance your work life and your personal life?
So a lot of it's commingled. I'm not gonna, I'm not the best at putting a wall and saying this is my person, this is my business, because a lot of it's mixed. Like a lot of my good friends are my investors. I mean, even my dad's an investor of mine, so it's really commingled in a way that sometimes I'll meet them out and we'll get drinks and then we'll talk about work. It's more of just, I wouldn't say separation, but more of time management, and just to make sure I can balance all of it. And I'm guilty for Google Calendar controlling my entire life. I have everything on there. I click it. I follow the GPS to wherever. So the truth is, I mix it all. It's all intermingled. I try to be friends with my coworkers, friends with my old coworkers, etc., while including my friends in the business. Like the moment I had my deal and I knew it could make money, the ones I knew who we've joked about investing, I immediately passed it off and was like, guys, I got this opportunity. What do you think?
I think that's very like a very good point. How you have to be close with your colleagues. The people that are working for DFI with me, I personally know them for a while. I don't think that I would have somebody work for. I think that one of the best things that I've heard recently is like you can't have somebody invest in the product that you would invest in yourself. And I know you alluded to that earlier, but that's like the whole thing. It's like, and then that kind of extends to the whole point where it's like if you hire somebody, you shouldn't hire somebody that you wouldn't want to work for yourself. So kind of like every single person that's working for me, I would work for them as well. So that's kind of like the whole mindset I have. And when I'm picking out the team that I'm working with, you got to make sure that every single step makes sense. I wanted to know a little bit more about how your background. I know you said that you have like a pretty good relationship with your dad. Obviously, he's an investor of yours. You started off working with him in the accounting industry. Can you talk a little bit about how that kind of gave you like a leg up and kind of like helped you pursue your dreams?
So for real estate, I'll be honest, it didn't help as much. For accounting, it was a blessing almost, because he knew people in the industry. My mom's also in the industry. She had connections. If I had questions, it's like imagine going to a partner at a company and being able to ask whatever questions you want at whim, because like he's my father, so he would answer whatever. And he was as smart as any of and most of the partners I've ever worked with. So it was like having a resource like that was beyond advantageous. So to answer your question, I basically had a cheat sheet for half of my job. Or if I was like, when you first started as when I started as a staff accountant, my first job, sometimes you'd be a little nervous to ask certain questions to your boss. You know, like an idiot. So I had the advantage where I can just call my dad and just be like, hey, can you help me on this really quick? And he'd be like, of course. So it was definitely a huge advantage to starting off. Clients that I help out with, and I've built my own small book of business. And a lot of them, if I don't know the answer, I have my dad who, has had his company for like 30 plus years now, as well as a few buddies now who have worked their way up in the industry just from knowing them from before. And so it just gives me pools of people to pull from now.
Pretty interesting. And that goes back to the whole point with networking. And your friends are your network. And even though it may seem like, oh, like your friends are just the people you go have a good time with, that's when you're young. Like you could have like fun with your friends when you get older. It's just like a different level of fun. Like if you're young and like having fun is like going to the park. Now you're going to golf courses or you're going out to go get drinks. It's just like a different level of fun. And definitely, I think as you get older, you start thinking of like this whole different mindset. It's like, oh, like, is this person like somebody I could work with? Or is it also like, oh, could it be like more than just like a business relationship? Because you do have coworkers that are only your friends at work. And I think it's super important to have like those coworkers that you also are like, okay, like we're friends outside of work too.
Yeah. Well, I've noticed also a lot of the friends I had, let's call it versus 10 years ago versus now, a lot of friends who think similarly. So we're all trying, we're all pushing for some form of life that we want. And a lot of your friends that are like that sort of stay the same and overlap. And then it always sort of just ties into work. Because like, for example, I have some friends who invest in one thing and another. then I'm investing, and then we all invest together, or some friends are being successful and fun to hang out with. So it's like a lot of those friends still tie together. And even though you're quote unquote working, like I said, it's commingled. It's not really like this side's the friendship and this side's the work. It's kind of like all getting mixed into a pot.
It's kind of like that whole thing where it's like, if you're having fun, are you really working?
Exactly.
The only part that sounds not so fun was when you were switching careers. Like you said, you were applying for hundreds of jobs, getting rejected. Can you talk a little bit about why you ultimately chose the company that you're working for right now?
Sure. They had the role so I had this mindset once I've been in real estate for a while of I wanted to be at a family office and I wanted to work for a really small shop. And the reason was if you go to the big shops, you get the pedigree, you get the salary. Like there's no question it's advantageous to have that on a piece of paper as well as your weekly paychecks or bi-weekly paychecks. But the truth is when you're at like a smaller shop like mine, they give me flexibility of raising my own money in the deals and working. Literally the principal sits right across from me. And every day we spend time together, like going through to-do lists and looking over deals and going back and forth, as opposed to when you're in the bigger place, you have this hierarchy of I go to my senior, who goes to my manager, who goes to the partner, and then we all have to report to these people over here and here. Well, in this shop, it's like me and him sit in an office, we hammer it out, we send out an offer letter, and then we start working on the property, calling out our contractors, etc. So it's much more hands-on where I'm involved in everything, but it also allows me to be entrepreneurial where I get to raise my own money, start my own, we'll call it secondary company that invests with them, while simultaneously be able to hunt for deals and get fees on that. So it's more of a dialogue of if you're making money, I can make money with you, as opposed to, hey, you're on this track and in 10 years, 20 years, you could be a partner and then be profit sharing. So I knew, and then this shop happened. Once I got the offer, I called a bunch of my buddies to sort of ask about them and, what do they know about them? And everyone across the board gave them very, very positive reviews and flat out said, if you work hard and take care of them, they'll take care of you. And that ultimately led me to say, all right, I'm in. And so far they've lived up to their expectation, which is why I'm still here and enjoying it.
It sounds like you have a great experience and any place would be lucky to have you. I wanted to talk a little bit about how you said you go out and raise your own money. Personally, being a person that does work with a lot of investors, I'm not going to say who and what I'm talking about specifically in this situation, but sometimes you do meet the type of investor who's kind of like, oh, like I know exactly what's going on here. And the only reason they're saying that is because like they have like this boatload of money behind them. And they're kind of like trying to make you feel like you're a way smaller fish and they're a much bigger fish. So how do you deal with that? Or have you ever dealt with a situation like that?
I have a few investors who just have, we'll call it deep pockets, and they want to sort of leverage it against you. And when you're first starting, yes, they're a big deal. And it's like, all right, you kind of have to cater to them and their whims. But if you can raise enough and get a good enough deal, you'll find the money elsewhere. You don't need them as much as they need you. We're in a market right now where the good deals are much harder to find than money and cash. Yeah. So because of that, someone in my position has the leverage over them where I don't need them. Like even my last deal, I got oversubscribed and I had to tell people I couldn't take their money. And so the point is, it's a great feeling. I feel bad actually, because then I tried to ask if I could take a bigger piece, but couldn't get it. But the point being is that if they want to leverage it, they want to leverage their buying power, unless they're a real big player like a bank, because obviously no one competes with the big investment banks of the world.
Yeah.
There's no reason to take their leverage if it's unreasonable. But if it's reasonable and you can figure out a way to work together without them constantly breathing down your neck and understanding every little decision you make, because that's what they're paying you for, then you need to reevaluate your relationship and figure out another one or another few. For example, like I have multiple investors now with the deeper pockets that if one is being difficult, I can always just go to another one. Right. I wouldn't just say goodbye. I would try to understand maybe there's a reason they're being difficult, but if they're just being difficult for the sake of being difficult, then you have to say
adios.
Exactly.
I wanted to ask, did you ever start on a project with somebody? And you kind of alluded to it with the whole like adios thing once it starts happening. Did you ever start a project with somebody and then you're like, oh, I can't deal with this person. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I'll give you back your money. Like, see you. Have a good.
I never actually collected their money. I've had people that were difficult, but we never got to the point where I took the money. It was difficult, and then I had to give it back. It was before I even raised it because I like to talk to my investors beforehand. It was like, all right, it may not be for us.
Yeah, it's kind of like the talking stage before you actually ask the person out.
Right. You
So,
try to go on a few dates first before just jumping right into the committed relationship.
yeah, because there may be some things on there that you may not necessarily like, but and it's way harder getting out of a relationship than from just somebody talking to you. So that's very cool.
Exactly. I'd rather go on the date first and figure it out.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely very strong points that you're pointing out, and it sounds like you learned a lot throughout your career. If you could give yourself advice to like younger Jason, what advice would you give yourself?
It's going to sound really lame and probably not the normal thing to say in an interview, but pedigree matters. I thought when I was, in high school and college, oh, I'm at Rutgers, I can just hustle my way in. And it is much harder than people lead on to just hustle your way into the top shops. If I could have gone back, I would have pushed myself harder in high school to get the better grades, to gone to the better school, still hustled, but the hustling combined with the pedigree would have pushed me that much farther. I probably would have skipped a year or two in trying to get to where I am. So pedigree matters. And I never really had shame of rejection. So that I don't need to tell myself, but it would have been to leverage technology more to do it on scale. So before it was like phone calls and this and that. And a few years ago, I got smart and figured out how to use not just using LinkedIn, but like there's softwares to help find people's information and stuff and sort of leverage all that we have in front of us with this computer in order to get to where you want to be. So I guess those would be the two big pieces.
That's pretty cool. I asked a couple people this question, and sometimes they said I wouldn't give myself any advice because I think that the way that I turned out right now is because I didn't have this. And who knows, like with the whole what's the butterfly effect or what's the whole thing that where if you change like one little thing like in the past, like
Everything
it changes
changes,
the whole everything changes. So for myself personally, I feel like I would give myself advice because definitely I did not have a certain level of confidence to myself. And even though I did start doing what I'm doing right now at a relatively young age, I could have started it younger. And I was always like, I'm too young. And I think one thing that I always tell people is that you're never too young to chase your dreams. You're never too old to chase your dreams. The guy from KFC, he literally started when he was like in his 70s or 80s. Like you're never too old to chase your dreams and you're never too young. All you need to do is have a passion. There was a girl on Shark Tank, 19 years old. She just closed a $400,000 deal with Mark Cuban. She's 19 years old. I'm 20. So that's what I'm telling you. Like
to add on to that, my last boss started the company when he was, I want to say 22. And I mean, I was 26 working for a 22-year-old. It didn't bother me because he happened to just be incredibly smart. So it doesn't matter the age.
That I 100% respect that because I think that a lot of people, when I do apply for certain positions or certain jobs, they kind of are intimidated by me because they're like, oh, look at, he's like 20 years old. He's like competing for the same jobs as like 35-year-olds. Like, oh, like, I don't know if we want him because he may be gunning for our job. But at the end of the day, I think that the best possible candidates you should always hire, and you shouldn't necessarily be scared of working for somebody who's younger than you. Like on Team DFI, we do have a couple people that are older than me, so they don't necessarily they're not like significantly older than me, but they understand that the value that you bring. And I don't think that age necessarily matters when you're working for somebody. It's about the expectations that they have and the way that they position the whole company. I wanted to know what is the biggest challenge that you have right now working in the sector?
Biggest challenge, probably the biggest challenge, and it goes back to the fundraising comment, I guess, is there's so much money out there just chasing yield. And by that, I mean, everyone's just sort of placing money into property in order to buy it. That when there's so much demand and not enough supply, the cap rates get compressed and the returns are way less. So finding that good property became a lot harder. And for example, you can't really find, like, we'll call it the foreclosed stuff or the auction stuff as much anymore, because even that stuff is getting bidded up left and right because everyone's just chasing property. So finding the diamond in the rough got a bit rougher. So it's like harder to dig. So it means every, let's call it 100 deals I look at, if I found 3 that I really, really were into, now it may be 1. So it's just a lot more digging, or I call it at work hunting, and just hunting for a deal. So that's probably the most challenging part, is figuring out how to find those deals. Like, I'm early enough in my career that the brokers aren't just tossing the really, really good ones at me yet. They're tossing them at the guys who could just come in with cash and close the whole thing and be out. But still getting good enough deals that I can bring my own investors in.
And that's kind of like, that's sort of like a very interesting thing that's going on right now in the markets, with hard assets selling for way over than they should. Like the watch market right now is like going absolutely crazy. Cars are going like through the roof. Yeah. Why do you think that people are switching more to hard assets?
I wouldn't say they're switching. And given I am not a supply chain person, so full disclosure, this is not not supply chain advice, I guess you'd call it.
Yeah.
Because the supply chain has been constrained, it's tougher to get materials for things, which has raised the prices because the demand didn't change, but the supply changed. So we're still sitting here. We probably were up here with supply, and now we just dropped. So think about all the cars they're talking about now. There's less chips. So because of that, they can't make as many cars because no one's going to buy a car nowadays without one. So they're making less of them. For real estate, for us to build new construction, it's tougher to get materials. So you have to pay more to get it quicker now. So it's really, I would say, a materials issue as opposed to anything else.
I mean, also they have like, I think that there's like certain hype of certain parts. So I think that certain neighborhoods are getting gentrified. Everybody's like, oh, this house just sold for this. And then everybody buys in that neighborhood. The same thing.
Oh, the housing market's a whole different mess. Yeah.
Because and then it's like the same exact thing with like the Tiffany Oyster Perpetual, how it's like selling for like $40,000 when it's like a $12,000 watch, and people are paying 40 just because of like this Tiffany dial that's not even Tiffany, because they're all like, everybody's jumping on the hype. So I don't necessarily know if it is a supply issue always, but it definitely is in like with cars. That's why it's going up. But I think that in the housing crisis, with like the housing market right now, I think that is only like one piece of it. I think that there's a bunch of people out there.
For the pricing also goes to, look, we've been in a bull market for 11 years.
Yeah.
People have made hand over fist more probably than any other long ongoing period in human, I don't want to say human history, we'll call it American history. So it's really, a lot of people have a lot of money also and don't know how to place it. And now see these things and it becomes a bidding war. And now that's where the new demand is.
That's why I have so many people putting money in like NFTs, crypto. They're like, oh my God, like I'm so rich now. And it's like, okay, what are you going to do with all that money? Party.
Right.
That's like the whole thing. That's like my dream investor, the people that like go throw these like crazy parties. I sit them down. I'm like, hey, I have these amazing companies. They're doing great things. Why don't you sit down, talk to them, possibly work out a partnership? I wanted to know a little bit about, like you said, about how you have all these meetings, how you're always trying to raise money for certain properties. You're looking for properties. Can you talk a little bit about like what a typical day in your life is like?
So a typical day is a very loaded question, because I don't say there's a typical day. I can tell you we'll call it abstract to-do list, or sort of what keeps me moving and going. I would say for Treeline, my main job, my big thing is just finding deals. I would say that's half my day, is talking to brokers, searching online, flying to places and meeting people and shaking hands. In any way I can get myself in front of just the gossip is what you'd really call it, I guess, just figuring out where the next property is to buy. And then, I guess I've spent part of my day, the fundraising and the tax work, that's busy for me, but it's not nearly as busy as just trying to find deals and just networking. Like, I'm still calling buddies, like how you're doing this podcast to meet people. I'm still calling people, reaching out just to have conversations. And you'll make fun. I keep a spreadsheet of people that I talk to and like make sure I reach out to them every few months just to like see what's going on in their life and make sure we're, how they're doing, how I'm doing, and make sure we're on each other's radar still. Because you never know when, either if they're in real estate, a deal might overlap that we could work together in some way, or like I have a buddy from NYU. We reconnected a few days ago, and it turns out his group may put money into one of my deals because of the way they raise. So it's like literally by taking the effort of just going through a checklist and calling people and making, the people that you want to talk to and stay in touch with. And you can see yourself growing, whether it's socially, economically, whatever it is, in some ways in your goals. It helps. So a lot of my day is literally just talking to people, catching up, finding deals, looking at deals, underwriting them, figuring it out. And I would say, yeah. So I would say half my day is puzzle solving. Let's call it 2/5 is maybe, or 1/5 is maybe like talking to people, and the rest is sort of all the miscellaneous stuff that I just put on my plate.
It sounds very difficult to keep working like that and not burning out. Obviously, you got Shabbat, day of rest. Shout out to the Jewish culture. Without Shabbat, there would be no rest. I don't work on Saturdays and Friday after 2. Every other day, I work. Sounds like it's super busy and hectic. What is your final goal and like your exit plan out of this whole like crazy lifestyle?
I like the lifestyle, actually. I don't want to exit it. I think it keeps me young. It keeps me going. It keeps me energized. I'm a full believer in like, we feed off each other's energy and all that spiritual stuff. So because of that, I want to be engaged constantly. Like, it's kind of the reason I'm like afraid to ever leave a city. I mean, I know I'm gonna have to move to I may have to move to a suburb, and we'll see how that goes. But I love the run, the hustle, the call, the do this, the do that, because it keeps you moving, it keeps you energy, it keeps you alive. And so I don't actually want to. Even when I was at the NYU conference 2 years ago, the CEO of Related gets up on stage, and I mean, this is a guy who is one of the most successful real estate investors in all of New York City. And he comes up and he goes, so he owns a building in Columbus Circle, and he was going down the elevator, and he said, what I realized is everyone around me is my age, given he's like 65. It's like, I need to change my scenery. So what does he do? He builds a building in downtown New York, a full skyscraper, just so he can move into the penthouse. And, given it's a great investment, he made money on it, I'm sure. But it was now in his building are people more of our age and younger. And so because of that, it's going to keep him young because he's constantly moving and energized and doing things. And that's sort of where I want to be, of constantly go, go, go. And, every so often, obviously you need a break of a little bit, but that's what'll keep you young. I don't want to be the guy on a beach, like sipping my drink, wondering if it's 3 o'clock or 7 o'clock or, 10 a.m. I'd rather have some structure.
No, I 100% understand that. Even myself currently right now, I don't like resting more than like 2 days. I feel lazy. I feel like kind of like, ugh. And even if those days that I am resting, I read every single day. I wanted to know, do you have like any books of literature that you're reading right now, or something that you recommend?
Sure. So it's going to sound also lame, I guess. I do a lot of Twitter reading. So I followed the right people who post, what's going on in the world. They keep they post economic statistics of, how the labor market's doing, how the logistics market is doing, how different areas. And it sort of lets me neutralize into where I want to be. And then obviously I read the Wall Street Journal, and I have bloggers from Substack that I follow. Full books. It's sad to say I don't have the time as much as I need to be. I read Sam Zell's book a second time actually recently, and that is absolutely incredible. Highly recommend. It's just a whole book on how he didn't want to follow the conventional way of doing real estate, but figured out purely supply and demand. And then because he knew how to work supply and demand, he was able to just jump into the industry and become one of the most successful real estate investors in the modern day. So definitely recommend.
It's called Sam Zell's book.
Yeah.
Perfect. I'm definitely gonna add that to my list because those are the types of books I like reading.
And it's a short read. I'm one of these guys who can't do the 500-page books. It's like a 230-page book. And he jokes through the whole way. Like there's literally a whole half a chapter on he's taking private jets from investor pension fund to pension fund. And because he doesn't wear suits, he's literally getting in the plane, putting on a t-shirt and jeans, and then getting off the plane and putting on a suit and like changing back and forth. And it's just funny to like read how he was already doing that back then.
But that's like the whole thing. It's like me personally, I don't usually dress so preppy, but because I talk to a lot of founders, they're always dressed so preppy. I was like, okay, it would be weird if they're dressed preppy and I'm dressed like this, and I have like my Jewish afro everywhere. And my Jewish mom prefers so much when she sees me like this. And I'm like, I'm always doing this for you, mom.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Kind of like closing remarks, I want to say thank you again so much for being on the podcast. If you want to like plug your social media of where people could reach out to you, potential investors, is there anything you want to like say to the audience?
Sure. Thanks first for having me. It's been great on this podcast. This might be this is the first one I've done with this cool Zoom background. So it's nice to have feel like I'm in a real, recording studio with you with this. And just say, don't be afraid to fail and make a vision of where you want to see yourself. If you're just shooting blind, you're going to end up with like a blind result. But if you at least target what you're looking for, you don't have to know exactly, but know what you want to learn, and then figure out how to learn it. You don't have to know where you want to be, because where you want to be may be different, but just learn the knowledge to get there, because then it may take you to a different route. So my only advice is just keep putting yourself in positions where you'll keep learning what you want to learn, and don't be stuck on a vision, because that's how you bottleneck yourself and get stuck and don't figure out how to navigate the correct way.